The scream tore through the castle halls before dawn had even touched the sky. Wren Calloway dropped the basket of herbs she was carrying and ran toward the sound, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor. She had only arrived at Ironclad Keep 3 days earlier, sent by the Healers Guild to serve as an apprentice, and she had already learned one thing about this place. Nothing here was ever quiet for long. She turned a corner and found 2 guards holding back a third man who thrashed against them, his eyes wild, his mouth open in a howl that did not sound entirely human. His skin rippled strangely, as though something beneath it was trying to break free, and could not. "Get the healer," one of the guards shouted. "I am the healer," Wren said, though she was only an apprentice, and stepped forward before anyone could stop her. The man's eyes found hers. For a moment, the wild look in them cleared, and she saw something that looked almost like a plea. Then his back arched, and the guards struggled to hold him down. "What is happening to him?" Wren asked. "The change came too early," the older guard said, his voice tight. "It happens sometimes, to the strong ones. Their wolf pushes too hard, too soon, and the body cannot keep up." Wren had studied injuries, fevers, and broken bones. She had never studied this. But she had steady hands and a mind that did not panic easily, so she knelt beside the man and pressed her palm to his chest, feeling the frantic race of his heart. "He needs to be still," she said. "Movement will only make it worse. Hold his shoulders, not his arms." The guards obeyed, unsure why they were taking orders from a stranger, but grateful someone seemed to know what to do. Wren did not know, not really. She was guessing, drawing on instinct and half-remembered lessons, but guessing was better than doing nothing. Within a few minutes, the man's thrashing slowed, his breathing evened out, the rippling beneath his skin settled, and his eyes closed in exhaustion rather than pain. "He will live," Wren said, sitting back on her heels, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed, but he should not be left alone for the next few hours. The younger guard studied her with new respect. "You have a gift," he said. Most apprentices would have frozen. "I did not have time to freeze," Wren admitted, and for the first time since the screaming started, she managed a small, tired smile. It was in that moment, kneeling in the corridor, with her hands still shaking, that she felt a presence behind her. She turned and found herself looking up into a face that seemed carved from stone, framed by dark hair and eyes the color of a storm about to break. Alpha King Draven Ashcroft stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression she could not read. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, and then at the man on the floor, and then back at her again, as though he were solving some private puzzle. "Who are you?" he asked finally. His voice was low and controlled, the voice of a man who had learned long ago never to let anyone hear what he truly felt. "Wren Calloway," she said, rising to her feet and trying to ignore the way her heart had begun to pound harder than it had during the emergency itself. "I am the new healer's apprentice, my lord. You saved my guard's life. I did what I could. I am not certain it was enough to call saving." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to name. Perhaps it was surprise. Perhaps it was something else entirely. "It was enough," he said. "Come find me tomorrow, at the second bell. I have need of a healer I can trust." Before she could answer, he turned and walked away, his long coat sweeping behind him, leaving her standing in the corridor with her heart still racing and 100 questions crowding her mind. The other guard, the older one, let out a low breath once the king was gone. "You have caught his attention," he said. "That is either the best thing that has ever happened to you, or the worst. I have not decided which." "Why would it be the worst?" Wren asked. The guard hesitated, glancing down the empty corridor, as though checking for listening ears. "The king does not trust easily," he said. "And there are things about him that even his closest men do not understand. Things he keeps locked away, the same as he keeps that ring locked to his hand." Wren frowned. "What ring?" "You will see it tomorrow," the guard said, and would say no more, no matter how she pressed. That night, Wren lay awake in the small room she had been given near the healer's quarters, staring at the ceiling and turning the strange evening over in her mind. She had come to Ironclad Keep expecting to spend her days setting bones and brewing remedies for common fevers. She had not expected to find a pack on edge, a king who looked at her as though she held some answer he desperately needed, and a guard whose body had betrayed him in ways that defied everything she thought she understood about the change from man to wolf. She thought of the king's eyes. They had been cold, yes, guarded and distant, but beneath that she thought she had glimpsed something else, exhaustion perhaps, or grief that had never been allowed to surface. She told herself it did not matter. She was an apprentice, new to this place, with no business wondering about the private sorrows of a king. And yet, when sleep finally came, it was his face she saw before her eyes closed. The second bell the next day found Wren standing outside the door to the king's private study, smoothing down her plain healer's dress, and wishing she had something finer to wear, though she was not entirely sure why that thought had crossed her mind at all. She knocked twice. "Enter," came the voice from within. The study was smaller than she expected, lined with shelves of old books and maps of the Pax territory. A fire crackled in the hearth, despite the mild morning, and the king sat behind a heavy wooden desk, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, his right hand resting on the desk in front of him. That was when Wren saw it, the ring. It was made of dark iron, plain and unadorned, except for a series of small markings etched into its surface, symbols she did not recognize. It sat on his smallest finger, tight against the skin, and around it, faint but unmistakable, was a ring of irritated reddened flesh, as though the metal had been burning him slowly for years. "You are staring," Draven said, without looking up from the papers in front of him. "Forgive me," Wren said quickly, forcing her eyes away. "I did not mean to be rude." "You were not being rude. You were being observant. There is a difference." He finally looked up at her, and for a moment, the guarded distance in his eyes softened, just slightly. "That is exactly why I asked you here. My lord?" He rose from his chair and walked to the window, keeping his back to her, as though it were easier to speak this way. "There is a wound on my hand," he said. "It has been there for years. It does not heal, no matter what is done for it. Every healer who has examined it has told me it is nothing, a scar, a minor irritation from the ring itself. I do not believe them." "Why not?" "Because it grows worse when I use my strength," he said quietly. "When my wolf pushes closer to the surface, the pain becomes unbearable. No ordinary scar behaves that way." Wren considered this carefully. She thought of the man in the corridor the night before, his body rippling with a change that would not complete itself properly. She wondered, though she did not yet dare say it aloud, whether the two things might somehow be connected. "May I examine it?" she asked. He turned from the window and crossed the room, holding out his hand. Wren stepped closer, took his hand in both of hers, and studied the ring and the skin around it. Up close, she could see that the redness was not simple irritation. The skin beneath the iron had a strange texture, almost as though it had been burned and healed and burned again, over and over, for years without end. "This is not a scar," she said slowly. "It looks as though something beneath the surface is fighting against the ring itself, as though the metal is holding something back." Draven went very still. "What do you mean?" Wren traced the edge of the iron band with one careful finger, feeling a faint warmth radiating from beneath it that had nothing to do with normal body heat. "I have never seen anything like this," she admitted. "But if I did not know better, I would say this ring was not made only to be worn. I would say it was made to suppress something, and whatever it is suppressing does not want to stay suppressed." The silence that followed stretched long enough that Wren began to worry she had overstepped, said something forbidden, touched on a truth the king was not ready to hear. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped so low she nearly missed the words entirely. "My father placed this ring on my hand when I was a child," he said. "He told me it was tradition, that every heir to the throne wore it, that it bound me to the pack and its power. He told me I must never remove it, not even to sleep, not even to bathe. He told me that if I ever took it off, something terrible would happen." "Did you believe him?" "I was a child. Of course I believed him." Draven pulled his hand back gently, cradling it against his chest, as though the memory itself had caused him pain. "But I am no longer a child, Wren Calloway, and I have begun to wonder whether my father told me the truth, or whether he told me exactly enough to keep me obedient and nothing more." Wren studied his face, searching for any trace of the cold, distant king she had first met in the corridor. She found none of it now. What she found instead was a man carrying a burden he had never been permitted to set down, A man who had spent his entire life following a rule he did not understand, simply because he had been told to. "I would like to help you find the truth," she said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "If you will let me." Draven looked at her for a long moment, and something in his stormy eyes shifted, like clouds parting just enough to let a single beam of light through. "Careful what you offer, healer," he said quietly. "Some truths, once uncovered, cannot be buried again." "I am not afraid of truth, my lord." "No," he said, almost to himself, studying her, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "I do not believe you are." Outside the window, the pack's territory stretched wide and green beneath the morning sun, calm and peaceful on the surface, the way it had appeared calm and peaceful for as long as anyone could remember. But Ren had begun to sense, standing there in that quiet study with the wounded king and his burning ring, that something old and dangerous slept beneath that calm. And she had a growing feeling that she had just taken the first step toward waking it. She did not yet know how right she was. She did not know that the ring on the king's hand held a secret older than his own birth, a secret that had been buried, guarded, and lied about for an entire generation. She did not know that discovering it would put both their lives in danger, unravel everything the pack believed about its own history, and force Draven Ashcroft to choose between the crown he had been raised to protect and a truth that would change everything he thought he knew about who he truly was. All she knew, standing there, with her hands still tingling faintly from where she had touched the ring, was that she could not walk away now. Something had already begun, and there was no going back. That evening, as Ren returned to her small room, her mind still full of the strange warmth beneath the iron band and the haunted look in the king's eyes, she noticed a folded piece of parchment slipped beneath her door. She picked it up carefully, unfolded it, and found a single line written in careful, hurried handwriting. "Ask the healer who came before you. Ask what happened to her. And then ask why no one speaks her name." There was no signature. Ren stood frozen in the doorway, the parchment trembling slightly in her hand, the quiet of the night suddenly feeling far less peaceful than it had only moments before. Somewhere in this castle, someone else knew that something was wrong, and somewhere in this castle, someone wanted her to know it too. Ren did not sleep well that night. The note stayed folded in her palm long after she had climbed into bed, and every time she closed her eyes, the careful handwriting seemed to burn itself across the darkness. Ask the healer who came before you. She had not even known there was a healer before her. No one had mentioned a name, a departure, a reason for the position standing empty when she arrived. By morning, she had decided she would find out. She began with Nora Bennett, a young woman who worked in the kitchens and had become, in the short time Ren had been at Ironclad Keep, the closest thing she had to a friend. Nora had a quick laugh and quicker eyes, the kind of person who noticed everything happening around her even while pretending to be absorbed in her work. "The healer before you," Nora repeated, keeping her voice low as she kneaded a mound of dough on the wooden counter. "You mean Elsie?" "Elsie," Ren repeated, testing the name. "What happened to her?" Nora glanced toward the kitchen doorway before answering, as though checking that no one else could hear. "She left," Nora said, suddenly. "One day she was here, tending to the sick same as always, and the next day she was simply gone. No goodbye, no explanation. The steward told us she had been called away to care for a sick relative, but Elsie never once mentioned having family outside the pack. Did anyone try to find out where she went?" "A few of us asked," Nora admitted, "but we were told not to trouble ourselves with matters above our station. After a while, people stopped asking. It is easier that way. In a place like this, you learn which questions are safe and which ones are not." Ren thought of the parchment note again, the warning that had been slipped beneath her door under cover of darkness. Someone in this castle believed the questions surrounding Elsie's disappearance were far from safe, and yet that same someone had chosen to point Ren directly toward them. "Did Elsie ever say anything strange to you?" Ren asked. "Anything about the king, or about his ring?" Nora's hands stilled over the dough. She looked up at Ren with an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between caution and curiosity. "Why do you ask about the ring?" "I examined it yesterday, at the king's request. There is something wrong with it, something that does not fit with any wound I have ever studied." Nora set down her rolling pin entirely now, wiping her hands on her apron as she considered her next words carefully. Elsie examined that ring too, once, she said finally. I remember, because she came back from the meeting shaken, pale as milk, and would not speak of what she had seen for the rest of the day. When I asked her about it later, she told me to forget I had ever noticed her mood at all. 2 weeks after that, she was gone. A cold feeling settled in Ren's stomach, the kind of unease that had no clear shape yet, only weight. You think there is a connection? I do not know what to think, Nora said honestly. But I have learned, in my years here, that when something unusual happens twice in the same place, it is rarely a coincidence. Ren spent the rest of the morning attending to her ordinary duties, tending a child's fever in the lower village, and restocking the healer's shelves with dried herbs. But her mind kept circling back to Elsie, a healer who had examined the king's ring and vanished without explanation. A note slipped beneath her door, warning her to ask about exactly that. The pieces did not yet form a clear picture, but she could feel the edges of something larger taking shape, something the people of Ironclad Keep had learned, through fear or habit, not to look at too closely. That afternoon, she sought out Elder Mira Holt, the oldest surviving member of the Pack Council, a woman whose memory reportedly stretched back through 3 different reigns. Ren found her in the small garden behind the western wall, tending to a bed of herbs with hands that trembled slightly, but moved with the sure, practiced grace of decades of familiarity. You are the new apprentice, Mira said without looking up, her voice raspy but clear. The one who saved young Callum Hart's guard from the change gone wrong. News travels quickly here, Ren said. News is the only thing that does travel quickly in this place, Mira replied, finally lifting her gaze. Her eyes, pale and clouded with age, held a sharpness that suggested very little escaped her notice, even now. What brings a healer's apprentice to an old woman's garden? I wanted to ask about the previous healer, Elsie. Something shifted in Mira's expression, a tightening around her eyes that told Ren she had struck closer to the truth than the old woman was comfortable admitting. Elsie was a good healer, Mira said carefully. Kind, skilled. She left the keep rather suddenly. That is what I have heard. I have also heard that no one truly knows why. Mira set down the small trowel she had been holding, and rose slowly to her feet, her joints protesting the movement. You ask a great many questions for someone who has only just arrived, she said, though there was no anger in her tone, only a kind of weary caution. I ask because I believe something is wrong, Ren said, deciding honesty would serve her better than pretending otherwise. The king's ring is not simply ceremonial. It is causing him harm. I believe it may be connected to whatever happened to Elsie, and I believe someone in this keep wants me to know that. Mira studied her for a long, silent moment, the wind stirring the herbs between them. Finally, she let out a slow breath, as though releasing something she had carried for a very long time. Walk with me, she said. Not here. Somewhere the walls have fewer ears. They walked together beyond the garden wall, along a quiet path that wound through a small grove of trees at the edge of the castle grounds. Only once they were well away from any listening windows did Mira speak again. I have served 3 kings in my lifetime, she said. Draven's grandfather, his father, and now Draven himself. I remember the day the ring was first placed on Draven's hand. He was no older than 6 years old, frightened and confused, crying for his mother, who had died only months before. His father, King Alden, told him it was a great honor, that the ring marked him as heir to the throne, and that he must wear it always. But that was not the whole truth, Ren said. No, Mira agreed. It was not. I saw the way Alden's hands shook as he placed that ring on his son's finger. I saw the relief in his eyes when it was done, as though a great weight had been lifted from his own shoulders and settled instead onto a child's. I was young myself then, and foolish enough to believe that a king's private grief was not my business to question. I have regretted that silence every year since. Ren felt her pulse quicken. What do you believe the ring truly does? Mira stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I believe, she said slowly, choosing each word with evident care, that the ring does not simply mark Draven as heir. I believe it holds something back, something that was never meant to belong to him in the first place. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible to take back. Ren's mind raced, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle that had begun forming since the night before. What could it be holding back? That, Mira said, I do not know. Alden never spoke of it plainly, not even to his most trusted counsel. But there were whispers, long ago, of a birth that went wrong, of a choice made in grief and desperation that Alden never forgave himself for. And there were whispers of a child who should have worn that ring, and never did. Wren's breath caught. Another child? Mira's pale eyes searched her face, as though weighing how much more she dared to reveal. I have said more than I intended already, she said. But I will tell you this, healer. Elsie asked the same questions you are asking now. She grew too curious, and too vocal, and within weeks she was gone from this keep, with no farewell, and no explanation offered to anyone who cared to ask. If you continue down this path, you would do well to remember what happened to her, and to move with far greater caution than she did. Are you saying someone made her disappear? I am saying, Mira said carefully, that some truths in this castle have proven dangerous to those who uncover them. I am saying that you should think carefully before you take another step forward, because once you do, there may be no path leading back to the simple life of an apprentice healer that you imagined for yourself when you arrived here. Wren stood in the quiet grove, the late afternoon light slanting golden through the trees, and felt the full weight of the choice in front of her settle onto her shoulders. She thought of the king's haunted eyes, the burning ring on his hand, the guard whose change had gone terribly wrong the very night she arrived. She thought of Elsie, vanished without a trace, and of the careful handwriting on the note that had found its way beneath her door. She thought, too, of the strange, undeniable pull she had felt toward Draven Ashcroft since the moment their eyes first met in that corridor, a pull that had nothing to do with curiosity about ancient secrets, and everything to do with the man himself, guarded and burdened, and, beneath it all, painfully alone. I cannot simply walk away now, she said quietly, even if I wanted to. Mira studied her for a long moment, and something like sad recognition passed across the old woman's weathered face, as though she saw in Wren an echo of a choice she herself had once failed to make. Then be careful, she said finally, and trust very few people with what you learn. In this keep, even walls remember whispers, and not everyone who claims to help you is telling you the whole truth of their reasons. That evening, Wren returned to her quarters lost in thought, turning over everything Mira had told her. A child who should have worn the ring and never did. A grief-stricken king, desperate enough to bind something into his surviving son. A healer who asked too many questions and vanished as a result. As she reached her door, she noticed something tucked into the frame, another folded piece of parchment, identical in size and shape to the first. Her heart pounding, she pulled it free and unfolded it with trembling fingers. This time, the handwriting was different from before, sharper, more hurried, as though written in haste and fear. Elsie is not dead. She is hidden, for her own protection, because of what she learned. If you value your life, stop asking questions before you share her fate. But if you value the truth more than your own safety, meet me at the old chapel beyond the eastern gate, 3 nights from now, when the moon is dark. Wren read the note twice, then a third time, her mind spinning with the implications tangled inside those few short lines. Elsie was alive. Someone in this keep knew where she was hidden, and why, and someone was willing to risk revealing that knowledge to a stranger who had been in Ironclad Keep for less than a week. She thought of Mira's warning, of the danger woven through every layer of this castle's history. She thought of the king's burning ring, and the desperate hope she had seen flicker briefly in his eyes when she offered to help him find the truth. Whatever fear lived in her chest, it was not enough to outweigh the certainty settling over her now. She would go to the chapel. She would learn what had truly happened to Elsie, and in doing so, she suspected she would come one step closer to understanding the secret buried beneath the iron seal that had bound Draven Ashcroft since he was a frightened child of 6 years old, long before he ever understood what he had lost, or what had been taken from someone else in order for him to survive. 3 nights felt like an impossibly long time to wait, but wait she would, gathering her courage in the darkness, preparing herself for whatever truth lay hidden beyond the eastern gate, in the shadow of an old chapel that the pack, it seemed, had also learned not to speak of too closely. The next 2 days passed slowly, each hour stretched thin by the weight of what Wren now carried inside her. She continued her duties as though nothing had changed, tending wounds, mixing remedies, listening to the ordinary complaints of pack members who had no idea that their new healer's apprentice was quietly unraveling a secret that touched the very foundation of their king's reign. But beneath the surface of her calm routine, her mind never stopped working. She thought often of the note hidden beneath her mattress, the promise of the chapel meeting still a day away. She thought of Elsie, somewhere out there, hidden rather than dead, carrying knowledge dangerous enough to force her into hiding. And she thought, more than she meant to, of Draven Ashcroft and the haunted look that had crossed his face when he spoke of the ring his father placed on his hand. On the second afternoon, she was summoned again to his study, this time not for an examination but, as the messenger explained, because the king wished to speak with her. She found him standing at the same window as before, his hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders carrying a tension that seemed to have grown heavier since their last meeting. "You wished to see me, my lord." "I did." He turned to face her, and she noticed immediately the shadows beneath his eyes, the look of a man who had not slept properly in days. "The pain in my hand has grown worse since we spoke. I find myself wondering whether asking you to examine the ring was wise, or whether I have simply hastened something that was already coming." "What do you mean?" He crossed the room and sat heavily in the chair behind his desk, gesturing for her to sit as well. "Since our conversation, I have begun to remember things," he said slowly. "Fragments, a woman's voice, singing, though I cannot recall my mother ever singing to me. A room I do not recognize, somewhere in the lower levels of this castle, that I am certain I have never entered, and yet the memory feels as real as anything from my own childhood." Ren leaned forward, her healer's instincts and her growing certainty that something extraordinary was happening, merging into sharp focus. "Memories that do not belong to your own life," she said quietly, as though they belonged to someone else. Draven's stormy eyes met hers, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something close to fear in them. "Yes," he said, "that is precisely how it feels." "Have you spoken to anyone else about this?" "No one," he said. "Who would I tell? My counsel would call it weakness. My guards would worry. It signals some illness of the mind. You are the only person I have trusted with any of this, and I do not entirely understand why." Ren considered her next words carefully, weighing how much to reveal about the note, about Mira's warning, about the meeting still to come. She had promised herself she would move with caution, and revealing too much too soon, even to Draven, felt like a risk she was not yet ready to take. And yet, watching him sit there, burdened and afraid in a way a king was never meant to appear, she felt the pull to help him grow stronger than her caution. "I have been asking questions," she said finally, "about the ring, and about the healer who served here before me. Her name was Elsie. She examined your ring once as well, and shortly afterward, she left the keep under circumstances no one has ever fully explained." Draven's expression darkened. "I remember Elsie," he said. "I was told she left to care for a sick relative. That is what everyone was told. I do not believe it is true." "What do you believe happened to her?" Ren hesitated, then decided that half a truth, carefully chosen, would serve better than silence. "I believe she discovered something about your ring, something significant enough that someone wanted her silenced or removed. I am trying to learn more before I say anything further, because I do not yet know who can be trusted with this information." Something shifted in Draven's face, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even respect for her caution. "You do not trust me fully either then." "I trust you more than I expected to," Ren admitted, surprising herself with the honesty of the answer. "But this is your castle, my lord, and your council, and I do not yet know which of them might have reason to want a healer silenced. Until I understand that, I think it is wisest for both of us, if I move carefully." Draven studied her for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth curved into something that was almost a smile, the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him since her arrival. "You are careful, and clever, and entirely unafraid to tell your king exactly what you think," he said. "I find I do not mind it nearly as much as I expected to." Before Ren could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the study door, and a council member entered without waiting for permission, a tall, narrow man with pale eyes and a thin smile that did not reach them. Ren recognized him from a brief introduction on her first day as Garrick Vane, one of the senior members of the Pack Council, a man whose influence, she had been quietly told, rivaled the king's own in certain matters. My lord, Garrick said, his gaze sweeping briefly over Wren, before dismissing her presence entirely. Forgive the interruption, but there is a matter requiring your immediate attention, regarding the eastern border patrols. Draven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained even. I will attend to it shortly, Garrick. It cannot wait, my lord. Garrick's tone remained perfectly respectful, and yet something beneath it carried an edge of insistence that bordered on command. The council is already assembled. Draven rose from his chair, and Wren saw, in the brief moment before he composed his expression, a flash of frustration quickly buried beneath practiced control. We will continue this conversation another time, he said to Wren, and though his words were formal, his eyes held a promise that felt far more personal. As Wren left the study, she glanced back once and caught Garrick Vane watching her. His pale eyes narrowed with something that looked disturbingly like calculation. A chill passed through her, quiet but unmistakable, and she found herself walking a little faster through the corridors than she needed to, eager to put distance between herself and that cold, assessing gaze. That night, unable to sleep, Wren decided to make use of the hours before the chapel meeting by searching the castle's small library for any records that might mention the birth of the current king, or the years surrounding his father's reign before Draven's mother had died. The library was quiet at this hour, lit only by a handful of candles she carried herself, the shelves rising tall and shadowed around her like silent witnesses to centuries of pack history. She found the section dedicated to royal records easily enough, but much of what she needed seemed conspicuously absent. Genealogies that should have detailed the births of every heir across generations skipped strangely across the years surrounding Draven's birth, as though pages had been carefully removed. Council meeting records from that period were similarly incomplete, gaps appearing exactly where she most needed information. Frustrated, she was preparing to give up her search for the night when a small, leather-bound journal caught her eye, tucked sideways behind a row of larger, more official texts, as though someone had deliberately hidden it there, rather than simply misplaced it. She pulled it free and opened it carefully, her candle flickering in the still air. The handwriting inside was neat and careful, clearly belonging to someone with formal education, and the entries were dated to the exact period she had been searching for. As she scanned the first few pages, her breath caught. This was no ordinary record. It was a personal journal, written by someone who had served closely within the royal household during the final months of the previous queen's pregnancy. She read quickly, her candle burning lower as the hours passed, piecing together fragments of a story that had clearly been meant to stay buried forever. The queen's pregnancy had been difficult, the journal described, marked by complications that worried the entire household. And then, in an entry dated only weeks before Draven's recorded birth, the handwriting grew hurried and unsteady, as though written in haste and distress. The queen has given birth to twins, the entry read. A boy and a girl, both healthy despite the difficulty of the labor. King Alden is overjoyed, though something in his manner troubles me. He spoke privately with the healer for a long while after the birth, and when I passed the nursery later that night, only one cradle remained occupied. Wren's hands trembled as she turned the page, but the next several pages had been torn out entirely, leaving only jagged edges where the paper had once been. The journal picked up again weeks later, the handwriting still shaken, describing a household in mourning for a queen who had died shortly after childbirth, and a young prince, the sole heir, being prepared for a future no one had expected him to face so soon. There was no further mention of twins. No further mention of a second child. It was as though the missing pages had erased not only the record, but the very memory of what had once existed. Wren sat frozen among the shadowed shelves, the journal open in her lap, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to form a shape too enormous and too dangerous to ignore. A boy and a girl, born together, only one cradle occupied by mourning, a king overjoyed and troubled in the same breath, speaking privately with a healer, before a child simply vanished from every record that followed. Draven had a twin. The thought settled over her with the weight of absolute certainty, even though the journal offered no definitive proof, only shadows and gaps, and the terrible silence where a second child's existence should have been recorded. She thought of the ring on Draven's hand, the way it seemed to hold something back, the way his own memories had begun surfacing that did not belong to the life he remembered living. She thought, too, of Mira's careful words in the garden, a birth that went wrong, a choice made in grief and desperation. A child who should have worn the ring, and never did. It was not Draven's birthright that had been stolen from someone else. It was the opposite. Somewhere, hidden away and erased from every record the pack maintained, there might exist a twin, a sibling Draven had never known he possessed, whose birthright he had unknowingly carried in that sibling's place for his entire life. Ren closed the journal carefully, her mind racing with the implications, and tucked it inside her healer's satchel, determined to keep it safe until she understood enough to know what to do with the terrible knowledge it contained. Tomorrow night, she would go to the chapel. Tomorrow night, she hoped, someone would finally help her understand the whole of what had been buried here, and why an entire castle had learned, through fear and careful silence, never to speak of it at all. As she made her way back through the darkened corridors toward her quarters, she passed the door to the king's private chambers and paused, her heart aching with the weight of what she now knew, and could not yet share with him. Somewhere behind that door, Draven Ashcroft slept, unaware that the ring burning against his skin might be holding back far more than some vague, ancestral power. It might be holding back the very existence of a sibling he had never known he lost, on the same terrible night that had claimed his mother's life and reshaped his own destiny forever. Ren pressed her palm briefly against the cool wood of his door, as though the simple gesture might somehow ease the burden he carried, unaware and unknowing, just beyond it. Then she continued on toward her own quarters, carrying secrets heavy enough to change everything, and praying she would have the strength to see this through to whatever truth waited at the end of it. The following night, Ren waited until the castle had settled into its deepest silence before slipping out through a side door she had discovered during her explorations, one used mainly by servants carrying goods to and from the eastern storerooms. The moon was dark, exactly as the note had promised, and the path beyond the eastern gate stretched black and uncertain before her, lit only by the small lantern she carried close against her body to keep its glow from spreading too far. The old chapel emerged from the darkness gradually, its stone walls half consumed by ivy, its roof sagging in places where time had worn away the pack's attention to its upkeep. No one worshipped here anymore, Nora had mentioned once in passing, not since a newer temple had been built closer to the village center decades ago. It was exactly the kind of place, Ren thought, where secrets could be kept safe from prying eyes and careless whispers. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, its hinges groaning softly in protest, and stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by a single candle burning on what remained of the old altar, and for a moment, Ren thought she had arrived to find no one waiting for her at all. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows near the far wall, and she recognized, with a jolt of surprise, the face of a man she had seen only briefly before, working among the scribes who maintained the castle's official records. "You came," the man said, his voice quiet but steady. "I was not certain you would." "You are the one who left the notes," Ren said, understanding settling over her. "My name is Callum Hart," he said, stepping fully into the candlelight. He was younger than she expected, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes that suggested long nights spent poring over documents most people never bothered to read. "I have served as a record scribe here for 6 years. It is not glamorous work, but it has given me access to things others overlook. You knew Elsie." "I did. She was kind to me when I first arrived, uncertain and overwhelmed by the weight of the castle's archives. When she began asking questions about the king's ring, she came to me for help, believing that if anyone could find the truth buried in old records, it would be someone who spent his days surrounded by them." "And did you find it?" Callum hesitated, glancing toward the chapel's shadowed corners, as though old habits of caution were difficult to shake even here, in a place he had chosen specifically for its privacy. "Some of it," he said finally. "Enough to understand why someone wanted Elsie silenced before she could learn more." "I found a journal in the library," Ren said, pulling the leather-bound book from her satchel and holding it out to him. "It mentions twins, a boy and a girl, both born to Queen Alara before her death, but by morning, only one cradle was occupied, and every record afterward speaks only of a single heir." Callum's expression shifted, surprise and something like relief crossing his features as he took the journal carefully into his ink-stained hands. "I searched for this exact record for months," he admitted. "I knew it existed somewhere, based on fragments Elsie had already uncovered before she vanished, but I could never locate it myself." Where did you find it? Hidden behind other books, as though someone wanted it kept safe rather than destroyed entirely. That would have been Elsie's doing, Callum said, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. She told me once that she could not bring herself to destroy the only proof of what had happened, no matter how dangerous it was to keep. She said the truth deserved to survive, even if she herself did not. A chill ran through Wren at those words. Is she alive, Callum? Your note said she was hidden, not dead. She is alive, Callum confirmed, and Wren felt a knot of tension in her chest loosen slightly. When she grew close enough to the truth that her safety became uncertain, I helped her leave the keep quietly, before anyone in the council could act against her directly. She lives now in a small village 2 days' journey from here, under a different name, waiting for the day it becomes safe enough to return. Why did she have to hide it all? What exactly did she learn that made her so dangerous to someone? Callum set the journal down carefully on the old altar and drew a slow breath, as though preparing himself to finally share a burden he had carried alone for far too long. Queen Alara did give birth to twins, he said. A son, who became Draven, and a daughter, born only minutes before him. But the daughter's birth was marked by something the healers of that time could not explain. She showed signs, even as a newborn, of an unusually strong connection to the pack's ancestral power, stronger than anything recorded in generations. Stronger than her brothers? Far stronger, Callum said. King Alden feared what that power might mean, both for his daughter's safety and for the stability of his own reign. There were old prophecies, half forgotten even then, warning that a child born with power beyond the ordinary bloodline could bring either great strength to the pack or great ruin, depending on how that power was guided. Alden was not willing to risk which outcome his daughter's life might bring. Wren felt sick with the growing shape of the story unfolding before her. What did he do? He could not bring himself to harm his own child, Callum said quietly. Whatever else Alden was, by every account I have found, he loved his children fiercely. Instead, he made a different choice. He had the ring forged, using old methods barely remembered even by the pack's most skilled craftsmen, designed to bind and suppress extraordinary power. And rather than place it on his daughter, whose power he feared exposing to a council he did not fully trust, he placed it instead on his infant son, believing that binding the ring to Draven would somehow shield both children from whatever danger their daughter's unusual strength might invite. I do not understand, Wren said slowly. If the ring suppresses power, and it was his daughter who had the extraordinary strength, why place it on Draven at all? Callum's expression grew grave. Because the ring does not simply suppress power within the wearer, he said. It binds a connection between two bloodlines joined at birth. Twins born together share a link deeper than ordinary siblings, a link tied to the very magic that flows through this pack's ancestral line. By placing the ring on Draven, Alden bound his son's own natural strength to remain permanently suppressed, in order to prevent that connection from ever fully awakening his daughter's power to its true extent, wherever she might be hidden. Wren stared at him, the pieces settling into place with terrible clarity. He sacrificed his son's strength to protect his daughter. Yes, Callum said, and in doing so, he ensured that Draven has spent his entire life ruling as Alpha King with only a fraction of the power he should rightfully possess, believing all the while that the ring was simply tradition, simply ceremony, when in truth, it has been silently containing him since the day he was born. And the daughter? What happened to her? She was given to a trusted family outside the keep, raised in secrecy under a different name, with no knowledge of her true parentage or the power she carried. Alden visited her in secret for years, or so Elsie's research suggested, though even that trail eventually went cold. Elsie believed the girl was still alive somewhere, still unaware of who she truly was, still carrying power that had never been trained or understood, simply because no one had ever told her the truth of what she was. Wren's mind raced, trying to hold the full weight of everything Callum had revealed. Draven had a twin sister, hidden and unaware, somewhere beyond the walls of the only home he had ever known, and the ring, that had caused him a lifetime of unexplained pain, was not simply ceremonial tradition, but a deliberate suppression, a chain forged from grief and fear that had bound him since infancy, robbing him of strength that was rightfully his own. This is why Elsie had to hide, Wren said slowly, because someone in the council learned she had discovered this. Garrick Vane, Callum said, and Wren's breath caught at the name. He has served on the council since before Alden's death, and I believe he suspects, if not the full truth, then enough of it to fear what would happen to his own influence if the daughter's existence and true power were ever revealed. A stronger heir, awakened and trained, might threaten the careful balance of control he has built over the years serving as advisor to a king he considers easier to guide, precisely because that king's power has always been suppressed. Wren thought of Garrick's cold, calculating gaze in the study only days before, the way he had interrupted her conversation with Draven with such deliberate urgency. You believe Garrick would harm Draven, or his sister, to protect his own position. I believe Garrick has already proven willing to silence anyone who threatens to expose this truth, Callum said grimly. Elsie is only the most recent example. I do not know how far he might go, if he believed the secret was truly at risk of coming fully into the light. The candle on the altar flickered low, casting long, uncertain shadows across the chapel's worn stone floor. Wren felt the enormity of what she now carried settle heavily onto her shoulders, knowledge dangerous enough to threaten not only her own safety, but Draven's, and the safety of a sister he did not yet know existed, somewhere beyond these walls, living an ordinary life, while carrying power she had never been taught to understand. I need to tell him, Wren said finally. He deserves to know the truth, even if it puts us both in danger. Callum studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering across his tired features. Elsie believed the same thing. Before she was forced into hiding, he said. I will help you however I can, but you must move carefully, Wren. Garrick has eyes and ears throughout this keep, and he will not hesitate to act if he believes you have learned too much. Where can I find Elsie, if I need her testimony to convince Draven of what we have found? Callum hesitated, weighing the risk of sharing that information even here, in this quiet, hidden chapel. Finally, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small folded map, marked with careful, precise handwriting, indicating a route through the forest, toward a village Wren had never heard mentioned before. Guard this carefully, he said, pressing it into her hands. If the time comes that you need her, this will lead you to where she is hidden. But do not go, unless you are certain it is necessary. Every journey carries risk, and I would not have you share her fate simply for the sake of convincing a king who may already be closer to believing you than you realize. Wren tucked the map carefully alongside the journal in her satchel, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she now carried, both knowledge and responsibility intertwined into something she could no longer set aside. As she prepared to leave the chapel and make her way back through the darkness toward the keep, Callum caught her arm gently. One more thing, he said, his voice dropping lower still. Elsie believed, in her final weeks here, that Garrick was not acting alone. She suspected someone closer to the throne itself was helping him maintain the secret, someone with access to the king's private chambers, someone Draven trusts without question. She never learned who, before she was forced to flee. Be careful who you trust with what you now know, Wren, even within the castle walls closest to the king himself. The warning settled over Wren like a shadow as she stepped back out into the dark, cold night, the chapel door creaking shut behind her. Somewhere within Ironclad Keep, a traitor moved freely among the king's most trusted circle, and she had no way yet of knowing which familiar face might be hiding betrayal behind it. She thought of Draven, sleeping unaware in his chambers, surrounded by people he believed he could trust completely, and quickened her pace back toward the keep, suddenly desperate to reach him before anyone else discovered how close she had come to uncovering the truth that had cost Elsie everything she once had. Wren did not sleep at all that night. She sat awake in her small room, the journal and the map spread across her narrow bed, turning Callum's final warning over and over in her mind. Someone close to Draven, someone he trusted without question, might be helping Garrick Vane keep this secret buried. The thought made her stomach twist with unease every time she considered the faces she had come to associate with the king's inner circle, none of whom she knew well enough yet to judge with any certainty. By the time morning light crept through her window, she had made a decision. She would tell Draven what she knew, not all of it, not yet, but enough to prepare him for the greater truth still waiting to be revealed. She could not, in good conscience, continue keeping something of this magnitude from him, while he suffered daily beneath the weight of a ring he did not understand. She requested an audience through the usual channels, and was surprised when the response came back within the hour, summoning her not to his study, but to a private garden on the northern side of the keep, one she had not yet had occasion to visit. When she arrived, she found Draven seated alone on a stone bench beneath a wide, flowering tree, his posture uncharacteristically relaxed, though the shadows beneath his eyes told her he had rested no better than she had. "You look troubled," he said, before she had even fully approached. "I have learned things," she said, settling onto the bench beside him at his gesture. "Things I believe you deserve to know, though I must ask you to trust me when I say I am still working to understand the whole of it myself. I am listening." Ren took a steadying breath and began, choosing her words with the same careful precision Mira and Callum had used with her, revealing enough to build understanding without exposing every fragile piece of the larger truth before she was certain it was safe to do so. She told him of the journal she had found, of the strange gap in the records surrounding his birth, of Mira's careful warning about a birth that had gone wrong, and a child who should have worn the ring and never did. She did not yet tell him of the twin sister, of Callum, of the chapel meeting, or of Garrick's suspected involvement. Those truths felt too large, too dangerous, to share, until she understood more clearly who around him could be trusted. Draven listened in silence, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap, as though bracing himself against the weight of what she described. When she finished, a long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft rustle of flowering branches overhead. "I have always known something was wrong," he said finally, his voice quiet and strained. "Not in the way you describe it now, with facts and records, but in some deeper sense I could never explain. I remember, as a boy, waking sometimes in the night, convinced I could hear another heartbeat alongside my own, steady and familiar, as though it belonged to someone standing right beside me. I told my father once, and he grew so pale and so angry that I never spoke of it again. Do you believe now that it might have been real, not simply a child's imagination?" Draven turned to look at her fully, and in his stormy eyes, she saw something she had not seen before, a fragile, desperate hope, layered beneath years of careful, controlled composure. "I do not know what to believe," he admitted, "but something in me wants desperately for it to be true. My entire life, I have felt as though a piece of myself was missing, some part I could never name or locate, no matter how hard I searched. If there is truth in what you describe, it would explain a great deal that I have never been able to explain to myself." Ren reached out instinctively and covered his clasped hands with her own, offering what comfort she could, without yet revealing the fuller, more staggering truth she carried. "I intend to keep searching," she said, carefully and quietly, "until I have enough certainty to bring you the whole truth, not fragments that might mislead or wound you unnecessarily. Why does this matter so much to you?" Draven asked, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable in a way she suspected very few people ever witnessed. "You are an apprentice healer who has been in this keep for barely a week. You did not know me before you arrived, and yet you have thrown yourself into uncovering secrets, dangerous enough to have already driven one healer into hiding. Why?" Ren considered the question carefully before answering, aware that her response mattered more than she wanted to admit, even to herself. "Because I watched you stand in that corridor the night I arrived, and I saw a king who cared enough about his people to appear personally when a guard's life hung in danger," she said. "And because when I met with you the following morning, I saw beneath the crown and the composure a man who has spent his entire life carrying a burden he never chose and never fully understood. I could not walk away from that, even if I wanted to, and I find, increasingly, that I do not want to." Something shifted in Draven's expression, the careful walls he maintained so consistently softening for just a moment, revealing warmth she had not expected to find beneath the guarded exterior he showed the rest of his pack. "I am glad you did not walk away," he said quietly. "I have spent so many years surrounded by people who serve me out of duty or fear that I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to have someone simply choose to stand beside me." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them named aloud, until the distant sound of approaching footsteps drew them both back to caution. Draven straightened almost imperceptibly, the careful, controlled king reasserting himself, though his eyes lingered on Ren a moment longer than necessary before he rose to greet whoever approached. It was Ellis Grant, the captain of the guard, a broad-shouldered man with an honest, weathered face that Ren had come to associate with quiet reliability. during her short time at the keep. "My lord," Ellis said, bowing slightly. "Forgive the interruption. The council has requested your presence for the midday session." "I will attend shortly," Draven said, though something in his tone suggested reluctance to leave the conversation unfinished. As Ellis withdrew to wait a respectful distance away, Draven turned back to Ren one final time. "Continue your search," he said quietly, "but promise me you will exercise caution. If there are truths in this keep dangerous enough to have already claimed one healer's safety, I would not have them claim yours as well." "I promise," Ren said, though even as she spoke the words, she felt the weight of everything she had not yet told him. The sister he did not know existed. The traitor Callum suspected moved freely among his most trusted circle. She told herself she was protecting him by waiting, gathering more certainty before burdening him further. But walking away from that garden, she could not entirely silence the small, uneasy voice reminding her that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, had already cost this castle dearly once before. That evening, as Ren made her way toward the healer's quarters to prepare remedies for the following day, she noticed Garrick Vane standing near the entrance to the Western Archives, deep in quiet conversation, with a figure whose face remained turned away, obscured by shadow. She slowed her steps instinctively, some old, cautious instinct urging her to observe rather than announce her presence. She could not make out the words exchanged between them, but the tone carried an unmistakable tension. Garrick's usually composed voice sharpened with something close to urgency. The second figure nodded once, sharply, and turned to leave, and as they passed briefly through a patch of torchlight, Ren caught a glimpse of their face and felt her stomach drop with cold, sickening recognition. It was Ellis Grant, the captain of the guard, the same man who had interrupted her conversation with Draven only hours before, the same man whose honest, weathered face she had trusted instinctively since her arrival at the keep. Callum's warning echoed suddenly and sharply in her mind. Someone close to the throne, someone Draven trusted without question. Ren pressed herself back into the shadows of a nearby alcove, her heart pounding, and waited until both men had disappeared from sight before allowing herself to breathe normally again. She did not know what their conversation had truly concerned, could not be certain it involved anything beyond ordinary castle business, and yet the timing and the tension between them left her with a deep, unshakable unease that settled into her chest like a stone. She thought of Draven, trusting Ellis with his safety every single day, unaware that the very man sworn to protect him might be quietly working alongside Garrick Vane to keep the truth of his lost sister buried forever. She thought of Elsie, hidden 2 days' journey away, carrying knowledge dangerous enough to have already forced her into exile. And she thought, with growing certainty, that the time for careful, gradual revelations was quickly running out. If Garrick and Ellis were indeed working together, moving forward with whatever plan their hushed conversation had concerned, then every day Ren delayed sharing the full truth with Draven might be a day that brought them all closer to danger neither of them could yet fully anticipate. She resolved, standing alone in the darkened corridor with her pulse still racing, that she would seek out Elsie herself, and soon, gathering enough undeniable proof to bring the whole truth to Draven at once, before whatever Garrick and Ellis were planning had the chance to unfold any further. The map Callum had given her felt suddenly heavier in her satchel, no longer simply a possibility held in reserve, but a path she now understood she would soon need to walk. Ren planned her departure for the following night, intending to slip away quietly before dawn, and return before her absence could be noticed by anyone beyond the healer's quarters. She packed only what she needed, the map, a small supply of food, and a warm cloak against the autumn chill, and told herself repeatedly that this was the wisest path forward, even as a small, persistent voice in the back of her mind warned that traveling alone, through unfamiliar forest, carried its own considerable risk. She had not counted on Draven noticing her preparations. She was gathering the last of her supplies in the healer's quarters, well past the hour when most of the keep had settled into sleep, when a quiet knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find him standing there, still dressed in his day clothes, his expression carrying the particular alertness of someone who had noticed something amiss and refused to let it pass unquestioned. "You are planning to leave the keep," he said, his eyes flickering to the pack resting near her feet. "How did you know?" Ellis mentioned that one of the stable hands reported unusual questions about the eastern forest paths. Asked by someone matching your description, Draven said. I came to see for myself whether it was true. Ren felt her pulse quicken, though not entirely from being discovered. If Ellis had passed along that information so readily, perhaps her earlier suspicions about his loyalty had been misplaced, born more from fear and shadow than from any genuine evidence of betrayal. She filed the thought away to examine later, and focused instead on the immediate matter of Draven standing in her doorway, clearly not intending to leave without answers. I found someone who can help me understand the full truth, she said finally, deciding the time for careful half-explanations had passed. The previous healer, Elsie. She is alive, hidden in a village 2 days from here, and I believe she can confirm what I have only begun to suspect about your birth, and about a sister you may not know you have. Draven went very still, the color draining slightly from his face. A sister. I did not want to tell you until I was certain, Ren said gently. But I no longer believe waiting serves either of us well. There are people in this keep who may already suspect how close I have come to the truth, and I would rather you hear this from me directly than stumble upon it in fragments, the way you have been forced to live with fragments your entire life. For a long moment, Draven said nothing, simply standing in her doorway processing the weight of what she had revealed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rawness she had not heard from him before. You believe I have a twin sister, hidden somewhere beyond these walls, unaware of who she truly is. I believe it strongly enough that I intend to seek confirmation myself, Ren said, and I intend to leave before dawn, whether you approve or not, because I do not believe the truth can wait any longer. Draven's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ren feared he might forbid her from going, might insist on the authority his position afforded him to keep her safely within the keep's walls. Instead, he surprised her entirely. Then I am coming with you, he said. My lord, you cannot simply leave the keep unannounced, your counsel, your duties. My council has managed matters in my brief absences before, and will manage them again, he said firmly. This concerns my own blood, my own history, matters I have spent my entire life denied the truth of. I will not sit safely within these walls while you walk into unknown danger to uncover it on my behalf. Ren recognized the immovable determination in his eyes, and understood, with a mixture of frustration and relief, that arguing further would accomplish nothing. Very well, she said. But we leave quietly, and we tell no one, beyond what is absolutely necessary. They departed before the first light touched the sky, slipping through the same side door Ren had used before, moving swiftly and silently through the forest paths, outlined on Callum's careful map. Draven, despite his royal upbringing, proved a capable and steady traveling companion, familiar with the forest's terrain in ways that made their journey considerably safer than Ren's solitary attempt would have been. They spoke little during the first hours of travel, both lost in their own thoughts, the weight of what waited at their destination settling heavily over the quiet forest around them. It was not until they stopped to rest near midday, sharing a simple meal beside a small stream, that Draven finally broke the silence. Tell me what you know, he said. All of it, from the beginning. I would rather understand the whole of it now, before we arrive, than be caught unprepared. Ren told him everything then, the journal she had found, Callum's revelations in the chapel, the theory of the ring's true purpose, Alden's desperate choice to bind his son's power in order to protect a daughter he feared exposing to the Pack's ancient prophecies. She watched Draven's face carefully as she spoke, bracing herself for anger, for denial, for any number of reactions a man might have upon learning his entire life had been shaped by a secret so profound. Instead, what she saw was a quiet, gathering grief, layered beneath something that looked almost like relief. All my life, he said slowly, once she had finished, I have wondered why I never felt fully myself, why the power that should have come naturally to an Alpha King always seemed just beyond my reach, no matter how hard I trained, or how much I pushed myself. I believed the failure was my own. I believed I was simply not strong enough to be the king my father needed me to become. It was never a failure, Ren said firmly. It was a burden placed on you before you were even old enough to understand what was being taken from you. And my sister, Draven said, his voice catching slightly on the word. She has lived her entire life as well, unaware of who she truly is, unaware of the brother who might have known her, might have grown up beside her, if our father had made a different choice. We do not yet know her circumstances, Ren said gently. Perhaps she has lived a good life, safe and happy, unaware of the burden that comes with the throne. That would not be the worst outcome, even if it means a different kind of loss for you both. Draven considered this in silence for a long moment, staring out at the quiet stream flowing past them. I find that I want to know her, he said finally. Whatever her life has been, whatever burdens or blessings it has carried, I want the chance to know my own sister, even if that knowledge changes everything I believed about my place in this world. They resumed their journey as the afternoon light began to soften, reaching the outskirts of the small village Callum's map had indicated, just as evening settled over the forest. The village was quiet and unremarkable, the kind of place easily overlooked, exactly the sort of hiding place someone seeking to disappear from a royal court might choose. They found the small cottage Callum had marked without difficulty, set slightly apart from the village's main cluster of homes, surrounded by a modest garden that reminded Ren immediately of the careful, practiced hands of a healer. Ren knocked softly, and after a long moment, the door opened to reveal a woman, with tired but kind eyes, silver threading through hair that had once, judging by the faded portrait Ren had glimpsed briefly in the castle's records, been a deep, rich brown. Elsie, Ren said quietly. The woman's eyes widened first with alarm, then with cautious recognition, as her gaze moved from Ren to the man standing beside her, and understanding dawned slowly across her weathered features. You have brought the king himself, Elsie said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Then you have already learned enough to bring him here yourself. I suppose there is no more use in hiding what I know. She stepped back from the doorway, gesturing them both inside with hands that shook, whether from age or from the weight of the moment. Ren could not be entirely certain. Come in then, Elsie said. It seems the truth I have carried alone for far too long has finally found its way home. Inside the small cottage, warmed by a low fire and lit by simple candles, Elsie moved with the careful efficiency of a healer even now, setting out cups of tea for her unexpected guests, with hands that had steadied somewhat since the initial shock of their arrival. Draven sat stiffly at her small wooden table, his eyes never leaving her face, as though searching for some trace of the truth he had traveled so far to uncover. I did not expect to see you again, my lord, Elsie said, settling into the chair across from him. Certainly not standing in my own doorway, so far from the keep. Ren tells me you examined my ring once, before you left the castle, Draven said, and that shortly afterward, you disappeared without explanation. I did not disappear willingly, Elsie said, her expression darkening at the memory. I was warned, quite directly, that my continued presence at the keep had become a danger, both to myself and to information the council wished to remain buried. I left in the night, with Callum's help, before that warning could become something worse. Who warned you? Ren asked. Garrick Vane came to me himself, Elsie said. He did not threaten me outright, he was far too careful for that, but he made it abundantly clear that my questions about the ring, and about certain records I had begun to uncover, were not welcome, and that my safety within the keep could no longer be guaranteed if I continued pursuing them. Draven's hands tightened around his teacup, his knuckles whitening. Garrick has served my counsel since before my father's death. I trusted him. Your father trusted him as well, Elsie said gently. I believe that trust is precisely what allowed him to maintain his position all these years, close enough to the throne to protect whatever secrets he considers necessary to guard, whether for the pack's stability or for reasons entirely his own. Tell us what you know, Ren said. Everything, from the beginning. We found the journal, we understand the ring's purpose, but we need to understand the whole of what happened, if we are to know how to move forward. Elsie was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts, or perhaps gathering the courage to finally speak aloud what she had carried in silence for so many years. Your mother's labor was difficult, she began, addressing Draven directly now. I was young then, newly appointed as the keep's healer, and I attended her personally through the entire ordeal. When the first child came, a son, we believed the labor complete, and began the usual care that follows any birth. But then, unexpectedly, a second child followed, a daughter, small but strong, crying loudly enough to fill the entire chamber. Twins, Draven said quietly, as though testing the word against the reality he had only recently begun to accept. Twins, Elsie confirmed. Your mother held you both, briefly, before exhaustion overtook her. She never fully recovered from the birth, and passed only days later, a loss that devastated your father, beyond anything I witnessed in all my years serving this pack. But even in his grief, he noticed something about your sister that troubled him deeply. Her power, Ren said. Yes, Elsie confirmed. Even as a newborn, her connection to the pack's ancestral strength registered as something far beyond ordinary, strong enough that other healers present at the birth commented on it with genuine alarm. There are old stories, half forgotten by most, of children born with power beyond the natural bloodline, and the stories rarely end well for the pack that raises them without proper understanding or preparation. My father feared her, Draven said, his voice heavy with a grief that seemed to stretch back through his entire life. He feared for her, Elsie corrected gently, and he feared what the council of that time, less trustworthy in many respects than the one that serves now, might do if they learned of a child powerful enough to threaten the established order. He made the decision, in the depths of his grief and fear, to have the ring forged, using knowledge passed down through generations of pack healers and elders, capable of binding and suppressing extraordinary power. He placed it upon you, my lord, believing that doing so would sever the deep connection between twins born of such unusual strength, keeping your sister's power contained and hidden until she was old enough, and the pack stable enough, to safely reveal the truth. But he never did reveal it, Draven said. He kept the truth buried, until his own death, and left me to carry a burden I did not even understand I carried. Elsie's expression filled with genuine sorrow. I believe your father intended to tell you, eventually, when he judged you ready, and the council secure enough to accept the truth, without turning against either of you. But circumstances changed. Garrick's influence grew steadily throughout your father's later years, and I believe your father grew increasingly uncertain whether revealing the truth would protect his children, or expose them both to exactly the danger he had spent years trying to prevent. Where is she? Draven asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. My sister. Where did he send her? She was given to a trusted family, loyal to your father, and sworn to secrecy, who raised her as their own daughter, with no knowledge herself of her true parentage, Elsie said. Your father visited periodically in the early years, always in secret, always disguised, until eventually those visits grew less frequent, and then stopped altogether, as the demands of his reign and his failing health consumed more of his attention. Do you know where this family settled? Do you know her name? Ren pressed. Elsie hesitated, and for a moment, Ren feared the trail would end here, incomplete, and frustratingly out of reach. I knew the family only briefly, before they were relocated for safety, further from the keep than their original home, Elsie said slowly. But I recall that within recent years, circumstances brought them back closer to ironclad territory. I heard, second-hand and uncertain, that the family eventually settled within the keep's own village, seeking the protection and opportunity that proximity to the castle provided, unaware that they were bringing the daughter they had raised as their own, directly back into the shadow of the throne she had been hidden from at birth. Ren felt a chill move through her entire body as the implications of Elsie's words began to settle. If the family had indeed relocated to the village surrounding Ironclad Keep itself, then Draven's sister might be living, even now, in close proximity to the castle, walking among the very people who had spent an entire generation unaware of her existence. Do you remember anything else? Draven asked, leaning forward intently. Any detail that might help us identify her among the villagers? Elsie's brow furrowed in concentration, reaching back through years of careful memory. There was a mark, she said finally. A birthmark, shaped somewhat like a small crescent moon, on the inside of her left wrist. I remember it clearly, because it matched, almost exactly, a mark I had noticed on you as well, my lord, in the same location on your own wrist, when you were newly born. Draven's face went pale, and slowly, almost as though moving through water, he pulled back the sleeve of his coat to reveal a faint, crescent-shaped mark on the inside of his left wrist, one Ren had noticed before, without ever understanding its true significance. I have this mark, he said quietly. I have always had it. I never thought to question its meaning. Twin marks, from what the old healers believed, appearing identically on children born of such a deep shared connection, Elsie said. If your sister carries the same mark, and if she is indeed living within your own village, Finding her should not prove impossible, once you know precisely what to look for. Ren's mind raced immediately through the faces of everyone she had come to know since arriving at Ironclad Keep, searching for any memory of a crescent-shaped mark she might have overlooked without understanding its significance. And then, with sudden, startling clarity, a memory surfaced, so obvious in hindsight that she could not believe she had missed it entirely. Nora. Kneading dough in the castle kitchens, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a small, pale mark visible on the inside of her left wrist that Ren had noticed once, briefly, and dismissed without a second thought as an ordinary birthmark, nothing worth remarking upon. "Draven," Ren said, her voice trembling with the weight of sudden realization. "I believe I know exactly who your sister is." Draven stared at her, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and dawning wonder. "Nora Bennett," he said slowly, testing the name against the shape of everything he had just learned. "The kitchen worker." "She has a mark on her wrist, exactly as Elsie described," Ren said, her thoughts racing to piece together the timeline of everything Nora had ever mentioned about her own family. "And I recall her mentioning once that her family moved to the Keep's village when she was young, seeking better opportunity than the small farming community they had come from. I never thought to question it further, but it fits precisely with what Elsie has described." Elsie's eyes had widened at the name, some distant memory stirring behind her tired expression. "Bennett," she murmured. "Yes, I believe that was indeed the family's name, though so many years have passed that I could not have recalled it with certainty on my own. If this young woman carries the mark, I would say there is very little room left for doubt." Draven rose from his chair, pacing the small cottage with restless, urgent energy. The composed and controlled King Ren had first met, entirely replaced now by a man overwhelmed with the possibility of finally meeting a sister he had spent his entire life not knowing he possessed. "I must return to the keep," he said. "I must see her, speak with her, though I do not yet know how I will explain any of this, without causing her tremendous shock and confusion." "We must move carefully," Ren cautioned. "If Garrick has indeed been protecting this secret for years, and if he suspects even slightly how close we have come to uncovering it, Nora's safety, and yours, may already be at greater risk than we realize." Elsie nodded gravely in agreement. "Garrick has maintained his position and influence for a very long time by ensuring this truth remained buried," she said. "If he learns that his daughter, so to speak, has been found, that the true bloodline connection has finally been traced back to her, I fear what lengths he might go to, in order to protect whatever plans he has built around her." Continued anonymity. "Will you come with us?" Draven asked Elsie directly. "Your testimony may prove essential in convincing the council, and in helping Nora understand a truth that will undoubtedly overwhelm her." Elsie hesitated, old fear still visible in the careful way she considered the question. "I have hidden here a long while," she said finally, "but I find I am tired of hiding, and if there is finally a chance to see this truth brought fully into the light, protected rather than punished for revealing it, then I would rather stand beside you both than continue watching from the shadows, as I have for so long." They departed the following morning, moving with greater urgency than the journey that had brought them there, Elsie traveling alongside them despite her age, determined and resolute, in a way that spoke to the healer's courage she had carried, even in her years of hiding. The journey back passed largely in tense, thoughtful silence, each of them consumed by their own thoughts about what awaited them at Ironclad Keep. They arrived as evening settled over the castle grounds, slipping in through the same quiet side entrance they had used to leave, and Ren immediately sensed something was different. The usual quiet activity of the evening hours felt subdued, guards positioned with unusual tension along the corridors, servants moving quickly and quietly, avoiding eye contact in a way that suggested something significant had occurred during their absence. They found Ellis Grant waiting near the entrance, his weathered face etched with worry, and he moved toward them immediately upon spotting Draven, his relief visible even through his evident concern. "My lord, thank the moon you have returned," Ellis said. "I feared something had happened to you, given how suddenly you left without word." "What has happened here?" Draven asked, noting immediately the tension gripping the castle. Ellis glanced around cautiously before answering, lowering his voice. "Garrick has been asking questions, my lord. About your absence, and about the healer's apprentice traveling with you. He has grown increasingly agitated over the past 2 days, and this afternoon, he summoned an emergency council session, arguing that your unexplained departure suggests instability, unfit for continued rule. Ren felt her stomach drop. He is trying to use our absence against Draven. That is precisely what I feared, Ellis confirmed grimly. I have done what I could to delay the Council's final decisions until your return. But Garrick has grown bold, my lord. Bolder than I have ever witnessed from him before. Ellis, Ren said carefully, remembering the tense conversation she had witnessed between him and Garrick days earlier. I saw you speaking with Garrick recently, near the Western Archives. I did not know then whether to trust what I had seen. Ellis's expression shifted, understanding dawning, as he realized what she had witnessed and how she had likely interpreted it. I have suspected Garrick's involvement in matters beyond the ordinary council business for some time, he said. I approached him deliberately, hoping to learn more about his intentions, pretending sympathy toward whatever plans he seemed determined to protect. It was a risk, but I judged it necessary, given how carefully he guards himself against direct suspicion. Relief flooded through Ren at the confirmation that her earlier fears had been misplaced, that Ellis had remained loyal throughout, working quietly to understand the threat Garrick posed, rather than participating in it. What did you learn? She asked. Only fragments, Ellis admitted. Enough to know that Garrick fears something connected to your birth, my lord. Something he has worked for years to keep buried. I did not understand the full shape of it until this very moment, hearing the way you both speak now. Draven quickly explained the truth they had uncovered. The twin sister, the suppressed power, Nora's likely identity hidden in plain sight among the castle's own kitchen staff. Ellis listened with growing astonishment, the pieces of years of quiet observation finally settling into a coherent, staggering picture. We must reach Nora before Garrick learns what you have discovered, Ellis said urgently. If he suspects for even a moment that the truth has surfaced, and that the true bloodline connection has been identified, I fear what he might attempt in order to silence it once and for all. They moved quickly through the castle corridors toward the kitchens, Elsie following as swiftly as her age allowed, all of them driven by mounting urgency. But when they arrived, the kitchen stood empty, the usual evening bustle of preparation for the following day's meals conspicuously absent. A young kitchen worker, startled by their sudden arrival, informed them nervously that Nora had been summoned unexpectedly to the council chambers only a short while earlier, at the direct request of Garrick Vane himself. The color drained from Draven's face. He has already found her. Ren's heart pounded with dread as the full weight of the danger settled over her. If Garrick had summoned Nora directly, unaware perhaps that they had already uncovered the truth of her identity, his intentions could range from simple, calculated intimidation to something far more dangerous, depending on how much he already suspected. We must go to the council chambers immediately, Draven said, already moving with fierce, determined urgency toward the heart of the castle. Whatever Garrick intends, I will not allow him to harm my sister the same night I have finally learned of her existence. They hurried through the castle's grand corridors, Ren's mind racing through every possibility of what might be unfolding behind the council chamber's heavy doors, praying desperately that they would arrive in time to prevent whatever Garrick Vane had set into motion during the brief window of their absence. The council chamber doors stood partially open as they approached, raised voices spilling out into the corridor, one of them unmistakably Nora's, sharp with confusion and mounting alarm. Draven reached the entrance first and pushed through without hesitation, Ren close behind him, followed by Elsie and Ellis. Inside, the council members sat gathered around the long table, their faces registering shock at the sudden, unannounced arrival of their king. At the head of the room, Garrick Vane stood before Nora, who sat rigid in a chair clearly not of her own choosing, her eyes wide with fear and bewilderment, as she looked between the assembled council and the man who had summoned her there, under circumstances she did not understand. "My lord," Garrick said, recovering his composure with practiced speed, though Ren did not miss the brief flicker of alarm that crossed his pale features at Draven's unexpected return. "You have returned rather suddenly. I was just explaining to this young woman a matter of some administrative importance regarding the kitchen staff." "Do not insult us with lies, Garrick," Draven said, his voice carrying an authority Ren had not heard from him before, cold and absolute. "We know the truth. We know what my father did, and why. We know who Nora truly is, and I believe you have known it far longer than any of us." A heavy silence fell over the chamber, the assembled council members exchanging confused, uncertain glances, clearly unaware of the depths of what was unfolding before them. Nora's face had gone pale, her eyes darting between Draven and Ren, with growing, desperate confusion. "What is happening?" Nora asked, her voice trembling. "Someone please, tell me what is happening." Garrick's composed expression finally cracked, something colder and more desperate surfacing beneath the careful mask he had maintained for so many years. "You do not understand what you have uncovered," he said, addressing Draven directly now, abandoning any pretense of innocence. "I have protected this pack from instability for over 2 decades. Your father understood the danger a second, more powerful heir represented, and I have honored his wishes to keep that danger contained, exactly as he intended. By silencing a healer and threatening her into hiding?" Ren said, unable to keep the anger from her voice. "By keeping an entire family hidden from the truth of who they truly were? By protecting this pack from chaos," Garrick shot back, his voice rising with barely controlled desperation. "You do not understand the power this girl carries, untrained and unaware. Released into a pack unprepared to guide it, that power could tear apart everything generations of careful leadership have built." "She is not a danger to be contained," Draven said fiercely, moving to stand protectively near Nora, who watched the exchange with growing horror, as the full weight of what was being discussed began to settle over her. "She is my sister, robbed of her own birthright and her own family for her entire life, out of fear rather than genuine necessity." "Your sister," Nora repeated, the words barely a whisper, her hands trembling in her lap as she stared up at Draven with an expression of complete disbelief. "That is not possible." Elsie stepped forward gently, her healer's instincts guiding her toward the frightened young woman, despite the tension gripping the room. "It is true, child," she said softly. "I attended your birth myself, alongside your brothers. You carry a mark on your left wrist, do you not? A small crescent shape, just here." She gestured gently toward her own wrist to demonstrate. Nora's breath caught, and slowly, with trembling fingers, she pulled back her sleeve to reveal the small, pale crescent mark that had rested there, unremarked upon, her entire life. She stared at it as though seeing it for the first time, understanding finally settling over her features alongside overwhelming shock. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. Garrick, sensing the room turning irrevocably against him as the assembled council members absorbed the staggering revelations unfolding before them, made a sudden, desperate move toward the chamber's side entrance, clearly intending to flee before the full consequences of his actions could catch up with him. But Ellis Grant moved quickly, positioning himself firmly in the doorway, blocking any escape. "It is finished, Garrick," Ellis said firmly. "Whatever fear or ambition drove you to this, it ends tonight." Cornered, Garrick's composure shattered entirely, years of carefully maintained control giving way to raw, desperate justification. "I did what was necessary," he said, his voice cracking. "I watched King Alden nearly destroy himself with guilt over the choice he made, and I chose to help him carry that burden, by ensuring it stayed buried, for the good of this entire pack. Everything I have done to protect the stability this pack depends upon." "You did it to protect your own influence," Draven said quietly, the anger in his voice tempered now by something closer to weary disappointment. "A king weakened by a suppressed birthright is far easier to guide and control than one ruling at his full strength, alongside a sister equally capable of claiming power in her own right. Do not pretend this was ever solely about the pack's stability, Garrick." The council members, listening in stunned silence throughout the exchange, began murmuring among themselves, the weight of the revelations settling over the chamber like a physical presence. Mira Holt, who Ren had not noticed enter during the commotion, stepped forward from where she had been observing quietly near the chamber's edge. "I have served this pack through 3 reigns," Mira said, her voice carrying clearly despite its age-worn rasp. "And I have watched Garrick Vane's influence grow steadily throughout each of them, always careful, always calculated. I regret deeply that I did not question his motives sooner, when Elsie first vanished under circumstances that should have raised far greater alarm than they did." "The council will decide Garrick's fate through proper procedure," Draven said, addressing the room with the authority of a king finally standing fully in his own power, even without the strength the ring had suppressed for so long. "But he will not walk free from this chamber to threaten either my sister's safety or the truth we have finally uncovered." Ellis, See that he is confined, safely and without harm, until the council can determine an appropriate resolution. As Ellis escorted a visibly shaken Garrick from the chamber, the tension in the room began, slowly, to ease, though the shock of everything revealed still hung heavily over everyone present. Draven turned to Nora, who remained seated, still processing the enormity of what she had just learned about her own identity. "I am sorry," he said softly, kneeling beside her chair so that their eyes met more evenly. "I am sorry that you learned this truth in such a chaotic, frightening way. You deserved gentler circumstances than this." Nora studied his face for a long moment, searching, Ren suspected, for some resemblance she had never thought to look for before tonight. "I have a brother," she said slowly, testing the reality of the words. "All this time, working in these kitchens, I never imagined." "We have both been robbed of something precious," Draven said, "but perhaps, if you are willing, we might begin to reclaim it now, together." Tears filled Nora's eyes, and she reached out, almost hesitantly, to take his offered hand. "I would like that," she whispered. "More than I know how to properly say." Ren watched the moment unfold with her own eyes filling. The weight of everything they had uncovered together, finally settling into something that felt, for the first time in this long and difficult journey, genuinely hopeful. The truth was finally in the light, but she knew, watching Draven's hand still resting against the iron ring that had bound him his entire life, that the deepest part of their journey, releasing him fully from the burden his father had placed upon him, had only just begun. In the days that followed, Ironclad Keep settled into an uneasy but hopeful adjustment to the truth that had upended so much of what its people believed about their history. The council, guided by Mira's steady wisdom and Ellis's honest counsel, moved swiftly to formalize Nora's recognition as a true daughter of the royal bloodline, her years of quiet, humble work in the castle kitchens transforming almost overnight into a new identity she was still learning to fully accept. Garrick Vane's fate was decided through careful deliberation, the council choosing exile over harsher punishment, given his decades of otherwise loyal service, though he was permanently stripped of any influence or position within the Pack's governance. He left Ironclad territory quietly, escorted to its borders under guard, his ambitions and fears finally rendered powerless against the truth he had spent so long trying to bury. But the question of the ring itself remained, pressing and unresolved, and it was to this that Draven turned his attention, once the immediate crisis had settled. He summoned Elsie, Mira, and Ren to his study, along with Nora, who had begun, tentatively, to spend more time within the castle's private chambers rather than its kitchens, though she insisted, with a stubbornness that made Draven smile more genuinely than Ren had ever seen, that she would not abandon the work she loved entirely. "I want it removed," Draven said, holding up his hand, the iron band still burning faintly against his skin even now. "Whatever power it has suppressed for my entire life, I want it returned, fully and completely, not for my own strength alone, but so that Nora and I might finally stand, as we were always meant to, equal in the birthright our father tried so desperately, and so mistakenly, to divide." Elsie studied the ring carefully, her healer's eyes assessing what she had once, years ago, only glimpsed briefly, before fear forced her into hiding. "The forging that created this ring was old and complex," she said slowly. "Removing it will not be simple, and I cannot promise the process will be entirely without pain. But I believe, with Nora's own natural strength perhaps able to assist in ways I do not fully understand myself, it may be possible." Nora stepped forward, her expression a careful mixture of nervousness and determination. "I do not yet understand what power I am meant to carry," she admitted. "I have felt nothing unusual in my entire life, no strength beyond the ordinary. That is likely because the ring has suppressed the shared connection between you both since infancy," Elsie explained gently. "Your power may have remained dormant, waiting, in a sense, for the bond between you and your brother to finally be acknowledged and restored." They proceeded carefully, over the following days, guided by Elsie's careful research and Mira's deep well of ancestral knowledge, preparing for the delicate work of finally releasing Draven from the burden he had carried since he was a frightened child of 6 years old. Ren stayed close throughout the preparations, her steady presence a comfort to Draven, as he faced the uncertain prospect of finally becoming, fully, the man he had always been meant to be. On the evening chosen for the ritual, The small chapel beyond the eastern gate, the very place where Ren had first learned the truth from Callum weeks before, was chosen as the location. Its old, quiet walls, somehow fitting for a moment that would finally lay to rest a secret buried within them for over 2 decades. Draven and Nora stood together before the old altar, their hands clasped, while Elsie and Mira worked together, murmuring old words neither Ren nor the siblings fully understood, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations of pack healers who had come before them. The ring resisted at first, the iron growing hot enough that Draven's jaw clenched tight against the pain. But as Nora's hand tightened around his, something shifted in the air between them, a current of energy that Ren could feel, even from where she stood watching, though she possessed no power of her own to fully understand its nature. Slowly, impossibly, the ancient iron band began to loosen, and finally, with a final surge of warmth and light that filled the small chapel, it slipped free from Draven's finger entirely, clattering softly onto the stone altar. Draven gasped, staggering slightly, and Nora caught him, her own strength suddenly, visibly present in a way it had never been before, steady and sure despite her own unfamiliarity with the power now surging freely through her for the first time. For a long moment, brother and sister simply stood together, breathing hard, adjusting to a wholeness neither of them had ever known in their entire lives. "How do you feel?" Ren asked softly, once the strange glowing energy in the chapel had finally settled. Draven turned to her, and for the first time since she had met him, standing in that corridor on her very first night at Ironclad Keep, his stormy eyes held nothing guarded or distant at all. What remained instead was clear, unclouded warmth, gratitude, and something deeper still that made Ren's heart swell with hope for whatever future now lay open before them both. "I feel," he said slowly, wonder evident in every word, "for the first time in my entire life, completely myself." In the weeks that followed, Ironclad Keep began, gradually, to heal from the upheaval of everything that had been revealed. Draven ruled now with a strength that felt entirely his own, no longer burdened by suppression he had never understood or chosen, and Nora, embracing the sister she had never known she could become, took her place beside him, not as a rival to his throne, but as a partner in guiding their pack forward together. The divided birthright their father had once feared, finally reunited in trust rather than danger. Ren remained at the keep, no longer simply an apprentice healer, but someone woven permanently into the fabric of its most significant history. Her courage and persistence credited widely for uncovering a truth that might otherwise have remained buried forever. She found herself, more often than not, in Draven's company, their conversations no longer limited to secrets and suppressed pain, but stretching instead into easy laughter, quiet companionship, and a warmth that had been growing steadily between them since the very night she first knelt beside a wounded guard and looked up to find a king watching her, with eyes that no longer needed to hide. One evening, as autumn deepened into the first chill of winter, Draven found her in the same quiet garden where they had first spoken honestly of the burden he carried, the flowering tree above them, now bare of blossoms, its branches stark against the darkening sky. "I have spent my entire life believing something essential was missing from me," he said, taking her hand gently in his own. "I know now what that missing piece truly was, and I am grateful beyond words to have finally reclaimed it. But I have come to understand, these past weeks, that there is another kind of wholeness I did not know I was searching for as well, one that has nothing to do with rings or bloodlines or ancient power." "What kind of wholeness is that?" Ren asked, though something in her heart already suspected the answer. "The kind that comes from finally having someone stand beside me, not out of duty, or fear, or obligation," he said softly, "but simply because they choose to, again and again, through every danger and difficulty we have faced together. I do not wish to face whatever comes next without you beside me, Ren Calloway. Not as my healer, though I am deeply grateful for the skill and courage you have shown. I wish for you to stay as something far more important to me than that." Ren felt tears gather in her eyes, warm and unashamed, as she looked up at the man who had once seemed so guarded and distant, and now stood before her entirely open, entirely himself, offering her a future neither of them could have imagined on that first chaotic night when she arrived at Ironclad Keep, expecting nothing more than an apprenticeship tending common fevers and broken bones. "I choose you," she said simply, the words carrying every bit of certainty she felt. I have chosen you since the very beginning, though I did not fully understand it myself until now. As the last light of evening faded over Ironclad Keep, the castle settled into a peace it had not known in over 2 decades, its long-buried secret finally resolved, not through further division or fear, but through truth, courage, and the quiet, steady bond between a king finally free of the burden that had shaped his entire life, and the healer, who had refused to look away when everyone else had learned to stop asking questions. Together, brother and sister ruled with a strength born of unity rather than suppression, and together, Draven and Ren stepped forward into a future built, at last, on nothing hidden at all.